The battlefield was silent, yet heavy with fear and dust. A soldier sat alone, clutching the last piece of ration left in his trembling hands. His body screamed for food, but something louder whispered inside his heart. From the corner of his weary eyes, he saw a child. Skin stretched thin over bones, eyes wide with the kind of hunger that isn't just for food, but for life itself. For a moment, time froze. The world, with all its chaos and cruelty, seemed to pause as he extended that small piece of bread toward the child. It was more than an act of kindness. It was rebellion against the darkness that surrounded them. In that single gesture, the soldier didn't just give away his meal, he gave away his comfort, his safety, his tomorrow. But what he received in return was something far beyond what anyone could imagine. The child's trembling hands reached out, took the bread, and for a moment, their eyes met. One pair filled with exhaustion, the other with innocence lost too soon. As the child devoured the small ration, the soldier sat still, feeling the warmth of his own heartbeat echoing against the cold metal of his chest plate. He could still hear the faint rumble of gunfire in the distance, yet inside him there was only silence. The silence that follows a choice so human, so raw, it leaves a mark deeper than any wound. He looked at his empty hand, the same hand that once held a weapon, now trembling because of a gesture that felt both right and foolish. Hunger gnawed at him, not just in his stomach, but deep inside his soul. The mind began to argue. You're a soldier. You're supposed to survive. You can't save everyone. What have you done? But the heart, the part of him that still remembered home, laughter, and love, whispered back, you just saved yourself. It was strange how such a small act could create such a storm within. He had spent months in uniform, trained to obey, trained to fight, trained to ignore the cries of the world if they stood between him and survival. Yet now, sitting there in the dust, with the faint echo of a child's gratitude lingering in the air, he felt more human than he had in years. The battlefield had taken away his comfort, his peace, his sleep. But this single moment gave him something back, something he didn't know he had lost, the courage to feel. His stomach twisted in pain, reminding him of the cost. Hunger had become a familiar companion, one he had learned to silence. But now it was louder, sharper, almost punishing him for his compassion. Still, he didn't regret it. For the first time, he realized that true hunger wasn't for food. It was for meaning. It was for a reason to keep going in a world that no longer made sense. The dust swirled around him as he stared at the spot where the child had been. A part of him wanted to chase after, to make sure the child was safe. But the other part knew. His duty was elsewhere. And yet, the weight of that moment stayed with him. The image of those fragile hands clutching the bread would not leave his mind. In the chaos of war, where men fell and nations bled, he had seen something that defied logic. Innocence still breathing amidst ruin. That night, as he lay beneath the broken sky, he could still hear distant cries. Some were from the wounded, some from the desperate. But one faint voice echoed louder than the rest, the child's whisper, saying nothing yet saying everything. The soldier closed his eyes and felt a strange calm spread through him. He had always thought strength came from fighting harder, surviving longer. But now he understood. Sometimes strength is in surrendering your comfort for someone else's survival. He remembered the first time he held a rifle, how heavy it had felt. Not just the metal, but the responsibility. He was told that every shot, every move, was for the greater good. Yet, no one had told him that the real battle would be within, between duty and conscience, between fear and empathy. And today, he had lost that battle as a soldier, but won it as a human being. There was a strange irony in it. The army had taught him discipline, precision, courage, but it had not taught him compassion. That he had to remember on his own, that he had to find again in the face of a starving child. He realized how war strips men not just of their lives, but of their hearts. It turns kindness into weakness, empathy into distraction. Yet somehow, he had defied that transformation. He had chosen to feel in a place where feeling was dangerous. He wondered if others would understand. If his fellow soldiers would have done the same. Maybe they would have laughed. Maybe they would have scolded him for being soft. But he didn't care. That moment wasn't for them. It wasn't even for the child alone. It was for the part of himself he refused to let the war destroy. He had seen men lose their humanity long before they lost their lives. He had promised himself he wouldn't be one of them. The night deepened, and so did his thoughts. He thought of his mother, who once fed a stray dog even when food was scarce. He thought of his little sister, who cried when she saw a bird fall from the sky. These memories rushed back like fragments of a forgotten world. He realized that kindness was in his blood. It wasn't a choice, it was a remembrance, a way to hold on to the small, quiet truths that war tries to erase. His body was weak, his mind tired, but his heart was awake. He knew he might not make it through the next battle. He knew tomorrow could be his last sunrise. But strangely, he wasn't afraid. Because now he carried something that the enemy could never take. The peace that comes from doing what is right, even when it costs you everything. The wind whispered through the broken branches, carrying with it the faint scent of gunpowder and ashes. The soldier took a deep breath and whispered into the darkness, "May that child live." It wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. A silent vow to believe that his small act would matter, even if he never saw the outcome. He didn't know that destiny had already begun to turn, that life had quietly started weaving their stories together again. As the night faded into dawn, he rose, hungry but lighter, tired but grounded. His ration was gone, but he felt strangely full, not of food, but of something purer. Compassion had filled the space that hunger had left behind. He walked back to his unit with eyes that had seen too much and a heart that had learned the rarest lesson of all. That even in the darkest moments, the light of one kind choice can outshine the fires of war. He didn't look back, but something in him knew. That act would return to him. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when he would need it the most. He walked away from that moment, yet the image of the child lingered in the quiet corners of his mind. No matter how far he went, no matter how many battles thundered between, that face kept returning to him. Fragile, pale, eyes wide with both fear and gratitude. He didn't know the child's name, didn't know where they had come from, or where they would go. But he knew that something sacred had passed between them. A silent exchange that went beyond the ration, beyond the hunger, beyond the war itself. Days turned into weeks. The soldier kept moving with his unit, through mud, smoke, and silence. But sometimes, when he stopped to rest, his thoughts would drift back to that small figure sitting in the dust. He remembered the way the child's hands trembled, how the crumbs had fallen from those tiny fingers, how fiercely life had clung to that moment of mercy. In those memories, the soldier found strange comfort. Amidst the blood and chaos, it was proof that there was still something pure left in the world, something unbroken. The child had looked so small against the wasteland of destruction, like a fragile flame flickering against a storm. Yet, there was something unexplainable in those eyes, something deeper than fear. It was survival, yes, but also innocence refusing to die. The soldier often wondered how such a small body could carry so much pain and still look back at him with trust. It haunted him, because he knew he no longer had that innocence. The war had taken it from him long ago. Sometimes at night, when he couldn't sleep, he tried to imagine what became of the child. Did they find food, shelter? Did they survive? He would never know. But deep inside, he hoped that the small act of kindness had changed something. Even a little. Maybe it gave the child a reason to keep walking. Maybe it reminded them that not every uniform brought fear. Maybe it planted a seed, a belief that kindness still existed in a world that seemed to have forgotten it. He didn't know that somewhere, not too far from where he marched, the child still remembered him too. The memory of the soldier's gesture had become a spark in the child's heart, burning quietly against the coldness of the world. That day, when the soldier gave his ration, he hadn't just given food. He had given hope, and hope is the hardest thing to kill. The child, weak and trembling, had wandered for hours after that moment. The taste of bread still lingered on their lips, but it wasn't just the food that filled them. It was something heavier, a warmth that felt unfamiliar. They had seen soldiers before. They had seen men in uniform shout, destroy, and take, but never give, never look at them like they were human. That small act broke the pattern, and in doing so, it rebuilt something inside the child that had been broken long before. Every night, the child would remember that face, dirt-streaked, tired, yet gentle. In a world where everyone took, someone had given. And that simple truth became their reason to keep living. Each step they took from that day onward carried a silent promise to remember. Not just the soldier, but the feeling. The rare, forgotten warmth of being seen, being cared for, being worth saving. The soldier didn't know it, but that moment had tied their fates together. Two lives, one hardened by duty, the other softened by survival, had collided for a reason neither could understand yet. But destiny works quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It hides in moments like this, in bread shared between strangers, in eyes that meet once and never forget. The child's journey was cruel. Hunger followed them like a shadow. The world remained harsh. But now, beneath the pain, there was a flicker of strength. Each time they felt like giving up, they remembered that day, the hand that reached out instead of turning away. It reminded them that not all strength is violent, not all power destroys. Some power heals, some protects. As the soldier continued fighting his battles, unaware of how deeply he had changed a life, the child grew, not in comfort, but in courage. They learned to survive, to run, to hide. Yet beneath all that, they carried something the world could never take away: the example of compassion. They had seen what humanity looked like, even in the heart of war. And that image became their map, guiding them through darkness, teaching them that no matter how cruel life became, kindness was still the greatest weapon of all. One day, when the child stumbled upon a wounded man lying in the ruins, they didn't hesitate. The man was a stranger, bleeding, afraid. And yet, without thinking, the child knelt down and shared the little water they had left. That moment felt familiar. The act repeated itself through time, echoing like a memory passed down from one soul to another. And though they didn't realize it, they were carrying the soldier's legacy forward, turning his single moment of mercy into a lifetime of quiet courage. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't end where it begins. It ripples outward, touching lives you'll never see, rewriting stories you'll never hear. The soldier had no idea that his simple gesture had lit a light that would guide the child through years of darkness. And the child had no idea that one day, life would bring that light back to the very man who first sparked it. Somewhere, deep in his heart, the soldier still felt connected to something, as if a part of him was walking somewhere else, through someone else's eyes. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it, a quiet reassurance that his choice had mattered. It gave him strength when everything else felt meaningless. He carried that invisible thread with him into every battle, not knowing that it led back to the same child whose life he had saved. And so, the soldier marched on, unaware that the universe had already begun to weave their stories back together. The giver and the receiver, the protector and the saved. One had given food to survive a day, the other would someday give back life itself. But for now, Both carried the same truth in their hearts, even in war, even in ruin. Kindness is the one thing that never dies. Kindness never ends where it begins. It travels quietly, unseen, like a whisper through time. The soldier never spoke of that day again, but deep inside, he carried it with him like a secret prayer. Every time he saw destruction, every time another village burned, he would look at the faces of the survivors and wonder if somewhere among them, that child still breathed. He didn't know that the world had already begun to turn that moment into something larger than either of them could understand. The war raged on, swallowing everything in its path. Men shouted, weapons fired, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of hatred. Yet even in that chaos, something invisible kept moving. A ripple that had started with a single act of mercy. The soldier's kindness had not stayed in that dusty corner of ruin. It had spread, carried on by the very air he breathed. Because when one person chooses compassion over survival, it changes more than a moment. It changes the rhythm of the world. He didn't realize it at first. Days passed, months blurred together. He fought, he retreated, he endured. Hunger returned, pain returned, and yet somehow he didn't harden the way others did. He could still look at a face and see a person, not an enemy. He could still hear a cry and feel something stir inside him. The men around him had lost that. They had become numb, hollow, moving like machines. But he hadn't. Because once you've looked into the eyes of someone you've saved, you can't unsee humanity again. One evening, as the sun sank behind the smoke-stained hills, he sat with his unit beside a shattered wall. One of his comrades threw a stone and muttered, "We're just pawns. Nothing we do changes anything." The soldier looked into the distance, the same direction where he had once seen the child disappear, and softly said, "Maybe not everything, but sometimes one small thing does." His voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. He believed what he said. Because deep inside, he felt that ripple, still alive, still moving, carrying his small act somewhere far beyond his reach. Meanwhile, the child was living proof of that ripple. Somewhere beyond the borders of the soldier's world, the child was growing, surviving, remembering. Every act of kindness they showed, every stranger they helped, was another wave born from that first moment. The soldier didn't know it, but the energy he released that day had begun to multiply, changing one life, then another and another. That's how kindness works. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't wait for applause. It moves quietly, invisible to the eye, but unbreakable in its reach. The soldier's gift had become a chain reaction of mercy. And though the world around him still bled, he had unknowingly planted hope where none existed before. There were times he doubted it. In the darkest nights, when gunfire painted the horizon red, he would question himself. What difference did it make? The world is still burning. But something inside him, something softer, older, always whispered back, "The world changes one heart at a time." Well, he began to notice things he hadn't before. A soldier sharing his blanket with another, a medic refusing to leave a wounded comrade behind, a stranger giving water to an enemy prisoner. Small things, fleeting, fragile, but they reminded him of that day. It was as if kindness was quietly returning to the battlefield, piece by piece, through hearts that refused to turn cold. It's strange how a single act can move through so many unseen paths. The soldier thought he had saved a starving child, but in truth he had saved something larger. The memory of goodness itself. The world needs witnesses to kindness, and both he and the child had become its keepers. Neither of them knew, but life was already setting the stage for their reunion. The circle was turning. The ripple was coming back. As time passed, the soldier's body grew tired, worn from battles and endless marches. But whenever he felt close to breaking, he would close his eyes and see that child's face again. It gave him strength. It reminded him that he wasn't fighting just for survival anymore. He was fighting to protect that spark of humanity that still lived within him. One night, while resting in the ruins of a deserted town, he dreamed of water. Calm, endless water, and in the middle of it, he saw the bread floating, breaking apart into 1,000 tiny crumbs that drifted in every direction. Each crumb became a light, spreading farther and farther until the whole darkness began to fade. When he woke, he didn't know what it meant, but he smiled. He felt peace, a feeling rare in war. The child, now older, was following a similar rhythm of destiny. Every act of compassion they offered carried the same invisible energy that had once saved them. They didn't know whose face had started it all. Memory had blurred the details, but the feeling never left. And one day, that feeling would bring them right back to the man who had given it to them. For now, the soldier kept walking through the wreckage of war, unaware that the kindness he once gave was still alive, still breathing through someone else's hands. Sometimes, the smallest gesture is not about changing the present. It's about creating a future that remembers what being human means. He couldn't see it, but life had already begun to close the distance between him and the child. The ripple he sent out was circling back, gathering strength, preparing for the moment when kindness would return to him in a form he would never expect. And though he didn't know it yet, every heartbeat was leading him closer to that unbelievable moment. The one that would prove, once and for all, that nothing done from love ever disappears. It travels, transforms, and when the time is right, it finds its way home. The world moved on, and yet, fate was quietly preparing its return. The soldier, now older, carried scars that ran deeper than his skin. The war had taken years from him, friends from him, pieces of himself he could never recover. He had stopped expecting anything from life. He lived from sunrise to sunset, just surviving. But there was something in his eyes, a stillness that only those who have lost everything but learned to forgive can carry. He didn't know it yet, but life was about to circle back, bringing him face to face with the very soul he once saved. The war ended, but peace was not peace. It was just silence, a silence filled with ghosts. The soldier wandered through villages that had been reduced to bones and ashes. He searched for meaning, but there was none. Sometimes he'd see children running through broken streets, laughing despite the ruin, and it would remind him of that one face. The child with dust on their skin, with hunger in their eyes, and hope that refused to die. That memory still warmed him on nights when everything else felt cold. One day, as he walked through a war-torn town, the soldier collapsed. His body, worn and weak, had finally reached its limit. His uniform was tattered, his strength drained. He lay against a wall, his breath shallow, his eyes heavy. Around him, people passed, strangers too busy surviving to notice another broken man. For the first time since the war ended, fear returned. Not of death, but of dying unseen, forgotten, alone. Then, through the blur of fading consciousness, he heard a voice, soft, urgent, a tone that carried both fear and care. A pair of hands touched his face gently, trying to keep him awake. The soldier tried to open his eyes, and when he did, he saw them. Those same eyes he had seen once before, years ago, in the face of a starving child. But now they were different, stronger, older, and filled with something he couldn't name. Recognition flickered in both of them, quiet but powerful, like a candle reigniting in the dark. The child he had once fed was no longer a child. They had grown, survived, and somehow found their way back to him. The world, in all its cruel vastness, had brought them together again. The soldier's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. He didn't have to. The eyes before him said everything. The child, now a young healer, a survivor who helped the wounded, whispered, "Don't move. I'll take care of you." As they lifted him carefully, wrapping a cloth around his wound, the soldier felt something overwhelming. Not pain, not fear, but awe. The same hands that once trembled while receiving bread were now steady and strong, saving the life of the man who once saved theirs. The circle had completed itself. The ripple had returned home. Tears welled in his tired eyes. "Yo, you survived," he murmured, his voice trembling with disbelief. The young healer smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Because of you," they said simply. And in that moment, everything inside him broke. The years of pain, the weight of guilt, the silence of loss. All of it melted away beneath that one truth. His single act, done long ago without expecting anything, had lived on through someone else. He lay there, weak but at peace, as the young healer worked. Every heartbeat felt like a whisper from the past. He saw flashes: the bread, the trembling hands, the dusty air, the faint smile, all merging into this one moment. The act he once thought was forgotten had grown into something vast, something that had outlasted the war itself. The healer stayed by his side for days, tending to his wounds. They spoke little, but silence spoke louder than words. Sometimes, the soldier would look at the healer's hands, the same hands that once reached for him in hunger, and feel the universe breathing between them. It was as if time had folded, bringing the past and present together in perfect stillness. One night, as they sat beneath a broken roof under the stars, the soldier finally said, "I gave you food once, but what you've given me now, it's life." The healer shook their head gently. "You gave me both first," they replied. Their voice was calm, but their eyes carried everything: gratitude, love, destiny. In that instant, the soldier realized something profound. Kindness does not vanish. It travels through lives, through years, through generations. It becomes part of someone else's strength, someone else's courage, until one day, it finds its way back to the giver. What he had done in a moment of instinct had become the reason he was alive today. When morning came, the soldier could finally stand again. His strength was returning, but more importantly, his faith had returned. He looked at the healer, at the life that had once depended on his, and felt a peace deeper than any victory the battlefield had ever given him. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. The healer smiled, the same gentle, innocent smile he remembered from years ago. "Because once, someone taught me what humanity means." The words struck through him like light. He turned his gaze toward the horizon. The same sun that had once set on blood and chaos was now rising in gold. The pain of war still lived in the world, but for the first time he understood its antidote: not power, not revenge, but compassion, the kind that moves silently unseen, and yet changes everything it touches. As they walked side by side through the ruins, there was no need for explanation. Their silence was full of meaning. The bond between them was not of blood or name. It was of spirit. Two souls who had crossed the edge of survival and found each other again, not by chance, but by the quiet law of kindness returning home. The soldier never forgot that day, neither did the healer. They parted ways eventually, each carrying the other's story within them. But what remained eternal was the truth they had lived: that a single act of mercy can travel through time, through darkness, and one day return as salvation. And so, what began as a soldier's small act of compassion ended as his redemption. The bread he once gave to a starving child had come back to him, transformed into life itself. The ripple had completed its circle, proving that even in a world broken by war, kindness never dies. It only waits for the right moment to return. He walked away from that place reborn, each step lighter than the one before. The world was still scarred, yet somehow it felt softer, more alive. The air carried a kind of silence he had never noticed before. Not the silence of death, but of understanding. The soldier had spent years believing that kindness was a weakness, that mercy was a wound that could get a man killed. But now, as the memory of the child, now a savior, lingered in his heart, he finally understood that kindness had never been his downfall. It had been his shield all along. He thought back to that single moment when he'd handed over his ration, believing it to be a small, meaningless gesture in a sea of suffering. But standing there now, years later, he realized that one act had rewritten the entire story of his life. The universe had been listening that day. It had taken his compassion and sent it out like a quiet prayer, only to return it when he needed it most. What he had given in hunger had come back to him as healing. What he had offered in weakness had returned as strength. He felt the truth of it deep inside. Kindness is never lost. It doesn't disappear in the noise of the world. It moves, it grows, it circles back. Sometimes through people, sometimes through fate, but always through time. That is the strange law of life. What you give from the heart never fades. It finds its way home. The soldier walked for miles, feeling the rhythm of his own breath. Every inhale was a reminder that he was still alive, and every exhale was gratitude for the one who had saved him. He couldn't stop thinking about how the child had looked that day. Calm, focused, steady. A reflection of the very strength he had once given them. It struck him then that every act of goodness has two lives, one in the moment it's given, and another in the soul of the person who receives it. That second life can outlive wars, pain, even death. He remembered how people used to say that the world changes only through great power, through victories, through control. But he had seen the truth with his own eyes. The world changes through small, quiet acts that ripple outward. A ration shared, a hand extended, a life spared. These are the things that survive long after the noise fades. He sat by a river one evening, watching the water move, calm, endless, carrying everything that touched it forward. It reminded him of the ripple that had begun with him. The child had carried his kindness forward, and now, somewhere out there, others would carry it too. The realization humbled him. He had once been a soldier fighting for land, for orders, for nations. Now, he was something else. A man who fought for something unseen. For the invisible thread that connects all hearts that dare to care, even in darkness. He thought of how different the world would be if people understood what he had learned. If every act of kindness was treated not as a favor, but as a seed. Seeds grow quietly, hidden beneath the soil, unseen for days, months, sometimes years. But when they bloom, they remind the world that life never truly ends, it only transforms. He had planted one seed long ago, and now that seed had grown into an entire forest of compassion, spreading farther than he could ever walk. His mind wandered back to that moment with the healer, their words echoing in his heart. Because once, someone taught me what humanity means. Those words were now carved into his soul. Humanity. That was what he had almost forgotten in the chaos of war. But it had always been there, waiting beneath the dust and noise, waiting for one act to bring it back to life. As he watched the river flow, he realized that this was the real lesson the world had been trying to teach him. You don't give kindness to be remembered. You give it because it's the only thing worth leaving behind. The medals would rust. The victories would be forgotten. But the goodness you share, that becomes eternal. It travels from one heart to another, rewriting the stories of people you may never even meet. The soldier smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from understanding. He thought about how his own pain had once made him close, guarded. How easy it had been to believe that the world was too cruel to deserve compassion. But now he saw it differently. The cruelty of the world wasn't a reason to stop being kind. It was the very reason to continue. Because kindness was the only thing strong enough to survive it. He rose slowly and began to walk again, feeling the earth beneath his boots. Feeling alive in a way he hadn't in years. He wasn't walking away from the past anymore. He was walking toward something greater. Toward a world he wanted to believe in again. Every step carried a quiet vow to give back what had been given to him. To keep the circle moving, he passed through villages still rebuilding from war. He saw people hungry, tired, broken. And this time, he didn't look away. He stopped. He shared what little he had. Sometimes it was food. Sometimes it was just a word, a touch, a presence. But each act carried the same power. The power to remind another soul that they mattered. And somewhere deep down, he knew that one day, these small kindnesses would ripple forward too. The world had tried to make him a weapon. Instead, it had turned him into a witness to the truth that kindness outlives conflict. The child had proven it. The universe had confirmed it. And now, he was living it. As night fell, he looked up at the stars. Countless distant, shining through the same sky that had once witnessed his despair. He realized then that kindness is like light. You don't see where it travels, but you know it does. Even the faintest spark, once released, becomes part of something infinite. And in that vast silence, the soldier whispered to the wind, "What I gave came back to me. Not as food, not as survival, but as faith." His words drifted away, carried by the night air, becoming part of the endless ripple that began with one starving child and one hungry soldier. Proof that kindness never disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to return, stronger, brighter, and more alive than before. The wind carried his whisper into the dark, vanishing among the stars, but something inside him knew that it had been heard. Not by anyone around, but by life itself. He continued walking under that vast sky, each breath deep, steady, filled with a strange peace that only comes after breaking completely. The war was long over, yet battles still lived inside him. Battles of guilt, of questions that never stopped echoing. He had seen too much, lost too much. But this time, the silence didn't suffocate him. It healed him. He reached a small village by dawn, where laughter echoed faintly through the mist. Children ran barefoot, chasing a ball made of cloth. The sound hit him like sunlight. It had been years since he'd heard such innocence. For a moment, he stood still, letting the noise fill his chest, warming the spaces that had grown cold. He realized then that he wasn't the same man who had once carried a rifle heavier than his own faith. Something in him had shifted. The old version of him had died in that field the night the child had returned his kindness. And from that death, a new man was born. He spent days in the village, helping wherever he could, fixing fences, carrying water, teaching children how to build small shelters. Nobody knew who he really was, and he didn't tell them. They didn't see the scars on his soul, only the calm in his eyes. It was strange, almost cruel, how life could bring you from destroying villages to rebuilding them. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the real victory was not in surviving war, but in learning how to live after it. One morning, an old man approached him. Quiet, bent with age, eyes as deep as time. He handed the soldier a small book, its cover worn and edges frayed. "You should have this," he said softly. It belonged to someone who believed that even the broken can heal others. The soldier opened it, and on the first page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words F. "Do not let what you have lost make you forget what you can still give." Those words struck him like thunder. He had spent years trying to forget. The screams, the faces, the weight of every life he couldn't save. But now, for the first time, he realized forgetting was never the answer. Healing didn't come from erasing the past, it came from transforming it. Every scar he carried wasn't a mark of pain, but proof that he had survived. Proof that he still had something to give. That night, as the fire crackled beside him, he looked up again at the stars. The same ones that had watched him walk through death, through redemption. He thought of how each star burned alone, yet together they lit the sky. Maybe people were the same. Maybe the light within one person was enough to guide another through the dark. He decided to travel again. Not to run, not to escape, but to give, to pass on what he had learned, not through speeches or books, but through presence. The journey was hard. He met strangers who were broken in ways words couldn't reach. A widow who hadn't spoken in years, a young man consumed by revenge, a mother waiting for a son who would never return. And to each of them, he gave what he had: time, silence, compassion. He didn't preach about kindness. He simply lived it. Because he had learned that the most powerful lessons are not spoken, they are shown. Slowly, he began to see something extraordinary. When people received kindness, even in small doses, their eyes changed. They softened. They began to trust again. And just like before, he saw the ripple begin to move. From one person to another, from one heart to the next. One evening, he found himself standing before a memorial wall, names carved in stone, cold and eternal. He ran his fingers over them, whispering prayers to the fallen. His own name was not there, but a part of him felt as though it should have been. The man he used to be had died alongside those names. The one standing here now was built from what remained. The fragments of pain shaped into something gentler. And there, under the dying light of sunset, he understood the final lesson life had been trying to teach him: redemption is not found by being forgiven. It's found by forgiving yourself. All this time, he had carried his past like a punishment. Every good deed he did, every act of compassion, had been his way of repaying a debt he thought could never be cleared. But now he saw that the debt was never to others. It was to himself. He knelt before the stone, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I forgive you." The words felt heavy at first, trembling on his lips. But as they left him, so did the weight he had carried for years. He felt lighter, freer, as though the air itself had accepted his surrender. Tears came, not of grief, but of release. As the night fell, he rose with a quiet strength. No longer haunted, no longer searching. He finally understood that his purpose was not to escape his story, but to live it differently, to turn his pain into peace, his memories into meaning. And so he kept walking, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a messenger, a reminder that the smallest act of goodness can save a life, that even one moment of compassion can echo across time, that no matter how far one falls, redemption is never out of reach. As he disappeared into the horizon, a child in the village he had just left found a piece of paper near the well, old, faded, with words written in a trembling hand. "The kindness you give will one day return to you when you need it most. Until then, keep walking. The world still needs your light." And under that sky, vast, endless, unbroken, the ripple continued. The circle of kindness, once born in a moment of hunger and pain, now moved freely across lives, across generations. The man had vanished, but his light had not. It lived on. In every heart he had touched, in every act of love that followed. Because in the end, that is what it means to truly live, to leave behind something that doesn't die. Years later, the world had changed. The war was a shadow in the history books, but the story of the soldier and the starving child lived quietly in the hearts of those who heard it. Some called it a myth. Some believed it was fate, but for those who understood, it was a reminder that one small act of love can rewrite the ending of a life. The child, now grown, often looked up at the same sky where the soldier once walked beneath. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, they swore they could feel his presence, not in body, but in spirit. The kindness he gave had not ended with his life. It had become part of the air they breathed. And so, the circle closed, not with grand applause or monuments, but with silent gratitude. The soldier gave his ration, the child gave him back meaning, and together they gave the world a lesson: kindness never dies. It travels, transforms, and returns home. Always. Because even when war ends and names fade, love remains the only thing powerful enough to survive it all.